With every Hall of Fame ballot comes the debates of who is snubbed, debates that won't end until they're in. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the biggest Hall of Fame snubs without off-field issues at every position.
Totally sports-esque. Major League.
We'll go in reverse order and start in the position tie with first base for the most common position of Hall of Famers aside from pitchers, that being right field. A metric we can use is JAWS, which measures a player's Hall of Fame worthiness by comparing to those already enshrined at their position. A player's JAWS is their career WAR averaged with their 7-year peak WAR, not necessarily in order. And amongst current non-Hall of Famers, the leader in right field is actually Mookie Betts, someone who could retire right now and probably make the Hall of Fame. But amongst retired players, the leader is shoeless Joe Jackson. The reason he's on the Hall of Fame being his involvement with the 1919 Black Sox scandal, banishing him from baseball and the Hall of Fame, a decision that's still debated. A player's on the Hall for off-field reasons at every position, such as Sammy Sosa and even Gary Sheffield here for that whole steroid thing. But aside from current players and the banished, the highest at right field is Dwight Evans. He's only behind Carl Yastrzemski in total games played for the Red Sox, making 3 All-Star games, winning 2 Silver Sluggers and 8 Gold Gloves, with over 2,400 hits and 385 home runs in his 20-year career. And it wasn't like he was a borderline miss. He received just 5.9% in his first ballot, then 10.4%, then 3.6%, which kept him off future ballots after not meeting the 5% threshold. It could be attributed to his lack of typical Hall of Fame milestones after a long career, but most associated with his final ballot featuring Nolan Ryan, George Brett, Robin Yount, and Carlton Fisk. It doesn't seem likely he would have made it through the 10 ballots, but he was a modern baseball era finalist for the 2020 Hall of Fame balloting, but he would need 8 more votes. And aside from just position, Evans is one of the most deserving in all of baseball. Though he got off to a slow start in his career, he was one of the most productive offensive players of the 80s and someone who was known more for his defense. I think with the exact same career in modern analytics, Evans would probably make it if he retired now, with stats similar to Dave Parker, who was right there with him until just recently, as he was inducted to the Classic Baseball Era Committee, with Reggie Smith and Bobby Abreu right there with Evans amongst worthy right fielders. But I would put Evans there. And we move on to center field with plenty of players in the mix. Looking at JAWS, the current leader amongst non-Hall of Famers is unsurprisingly Mike Trout, who like Mookie Betts, could retire right now and make the Hall of Fame. But behind him are 3 who are definitely worthy: Carlos Beltran, Kenny Lofton, and Andrew Jones, who are all close to each other in JAWS. The leader of those 3 is Beltran, who became eligible 3 years ago and got 46.5%, and the next year, he received 57.1%, which indicates that he's probably going to make the Hall of Fame in the coming years. And what seems to have stopped him from getting even closer is his involvement with the 2017 Astros, which led to him being fired before getting to manage a game for the Mets. It's a very interesting situation and is bound to cause controversy once he gets in. You can bring up the steroid users who aren't in, shoeless Joe Jackson and Pete Rose, even players who are on teams that sold signs who are in the Hall. But all signs point to him eventually making it, and he ultimately deserves to. You can't really call him a snub with that just mentioned, but you can for Kenny Lofton. I made an entire video about the bad luck that chased Lofton throughout his career, and that was showcased in his Hall of Fame voting. As in his first ballot in 2013, he received just 3.2% of the vote. Someone with a higher career WAR in JAWS than 13 other center fielders in the Hall of Fame appeared on just 1 ballot. Maybe it was a case similar to Evans with his long career and lack of typical milestones, but Lofton is one of the best defensive outfielders of all time, along with having a high on-base percentage and stealing over 600 bases, including the most in postseason history. A situation similar to what Jim Edmonds faced, receiving just 3%, could possibly be the most egregious example of voting that made no sense. And right below Lofton is Andrew Jones, who is right on the border of making it, and he could make it with the announcement this year. Another great defensive center fielder, he won 10 Gold Gloves in his career, and during that time, he had the highest defensive WAR of any player by 10 points. And his 24.4 defensive WAR is the most of any outfielder in MLB history, and he managed to hit over 400 home runs in his career. Tough to stand out in the steroid era, having plenty of MVP-worthy seasons, including his 51 home run season in 2005, where he finished behind Albert Pujols. I think he will get in one of the next 3 years, and he should already be in. For this position, I'll put in Kenny Lofton, whose only chance now is to get in through a committee. And we move to left field for the most famous non-Hall of Famer, and Barry Bonds. Again, looking at Beltran's trajectory, and as Bonds' PR has seemed to gotten a little better in the previous years, you wonder if he restarted his journey with his first ballot being this year, would he have made it considering his 66% in his 10th ballot? Still a chance he does not, as he still didn't get enough votes to the committee, but if any steroid user gets in, it will be him or Roger Clemens first. And the 2 non-Hall of Famers following him in JAWS are not in for similar reasons, and that's Pete Rose and Manny Ramirez. Obviously Rose for a different reason with his gambling, but it's also easy to see a day where he gets in, especially after his passing, and as MLB looks a little hypocritical with the 45 sportsbooks ads placed in every stadium. But after those 3, the top is someone most probably aren't familiar with, and Sherry McGee, a dead ball era player who played from 1904 to 1919. He was part of the 1919 World Series, except he was on the team that didn't lose on purpose. He was one of the best from the era, driving in 123 runners one season and hitting just 6 home runs. He declined some at the end of his career with a broken collarbone, and he ultimately became forgotten in terms of Hall of Fame voting, though he was one of the best of the era. A great defender, he also compiled a 59.4 WAR. The WAR meant something completely different back then. The Hall of Fame is a lot about showcasing different eras, and he should be in for his time, though it's far-fetched now. Going to the infield at shortstop, there's another obvious choice in Alex Rodriguez, but just like Bonds, it's doubtful that he gets in. In his third ballot last year, he received 34.8% after starting at 34.3%, and without Bonds in, it will be hard to see him in Cooperstown. And there isn't a lot after him, with the two behind him being dead ball players, and Bill Dallin and Jack Glasscock. Glasscock playing his entire career in the 1800s, and Dallin playing 9 seasons in the 1800s, but like McGee, they both became overlooked. It took advanced stats for Dallin to become noticed, with his 75.3 career WAR being higher than the likes of Barry Larkin, Derek Jeter, and Pee Wee Reese, with his 28.5 defensive WAR being the 9th highest among shortstops. But like McGee, it will be hard for him to get in. Possibly haunting the voters could help him. And behind those two at the moment is Francisco Lindor. Maybe not in yet, he seems bound to be in the Hall of Fame eventually. And a few more names you can consider, being Bert Campaneris, Nomar Garcia-Parra, and even Troy Tulowitzki and Jimmy Rollins, who are on their first ballot. But for the position, I'll go back to the 1800s and choose Dallin. With the recent induction of Dick Allen, who joined Dave Parker with the Classic Baseball Committee, that removed the most discussed third baseman not in the Hall, and taking his place now will be Graig Nettles, someone who hasn't received much consideration. Despite not playing a full season until he's 25, he was able to record over 2,200 hits while being just 10 home runs away from 400, an underrated player who deserved more MVP consideration and Gold Glove consideration, as his 2 awards didn't really reflect his ability. His 21.4 defensive WAR being the 5th highest ever at the position, being one of just 4 with 350 home runs and a defensive WAR over 20. The others being Adrian Beltre, Cal Ripken Jr., and Andrew Jones. I think the recent induction of Scott Rowland and Dick Allen will help him, as his appearance on just 4 ballots, another example of it not making sense, as he's the choice now. And going to second, much of the discussion revolves around Lou Whitaker, who is deserving, but Bobby Grich could have a better case. From 72 to 83, per 162 games, he had a 6.4 WAR, with his 8.3 WAR leading the league in 1972, and he finished 19th in MVP voting. And his most impressive stat is his 43.6 wins above average. The only non-Hall of Famers who have appeared on a ballot with a higher wins above average being Alex Rodriguez and Barry Bonds. And he would receive just 2.6% of the vote in his first ballot. And he hasn't received consideration for the committee. Not really talked about, but it's up there with Lofton in the worst votes of all time. And the one behind him is Lou Whitaker, one of the most discussed non-Hall of Famers, and deservedly so. His 75.1 WAR is the highest amongst non-Hall of Fame second basemen, and is higher than 13 second basemen in the Hall of Fame. And amongst non-Hall of Famers who have appeared on a ballot, that ranks 5th, with 3 of the 4 ahead of him being Bonds, Rodriguez, and Rose. It's only right that he joins his double play partner in Alan Trammell in the Hall of Fame, the duo that turned over 1,100 double plays, which is still a record. And an interesting case is Chase Utley, who doesn't have the typical milestones, but the advanced numbers favor him. He could possibly get in one of his last ballots, but if future voters favor advanced numbers, it will only help him. It's really a toss-up between Grich and Whitaker with both deserving, but I think Grich has a better case, not by much. The first base position is a pretty interesting one, as most of the leaders of the non-Hall of Famers are not eligible yet, still playing, or they took steroids. The top 6 being Albert Pujols, Miguel Cabrera, Joey Votto, Rafael Palmeiro, Paul Goldschmidt, and Mark McGwire, and the one following him is Keith Hernandez. Though he lacks some of the typical milestones, with his 162 home runs being low for a first baseman, he still recorded 2,000 hits and has just about every accolade you could have. He's taken home an MVP, 2 Silver Sluggers, 5 All-Star games, and most notably, he's won 11 Gold Gloves. Often referred to as the best defensive first baseman of all time, only 3 Hall of Fame first basemen have a higher defensive WAR, and those 3 were all dead ball era players. Also only trailing Albert Pujols in career fielding runs. And he was a big part of 2 World Series winning teams, adding 50.1 championship win probability in his career, hitting a game-tying single in Game 7 of the 82 World Series, and hitting a huge bases-loaded single in Game 7 of the 86 World Series. But after his 9th ballot, he did not appear on any more, never getting more than 10% of the vote. Some blame it on the fact that he retired at 35, and another factor could be that he was the face of the Pittsburgh drug trials in the 80s. Either way, Hernandez is the only player with 10 or more Gold Gloves not in the Hall of Fame, or at least on a ballot. He has been considered for induction by the committee, but has yet to be inducted, though he is deserving for his peak. And that brings us to catchers for another player often discussed, in Thurman Munson. Without his tragic death at the age of 32, a few more average seasons would make him a no-doubt Hall of Famer. and it's a lack of longevity that kept him from the Hall. But in his 10-season time frame, he was the best catcher in the American League. A 116 career OPS+, a 43.2 offensive WAR, higher than Roy Campanella, including his Negro League stats, who played 9 seasons before an unfortunate car accident wrecked his career. And again, looking at wins above average, the only catchers with 25+ who are in the Hall of Fame are him and Johan Santana, someone who came into the league at the same time as him and is also deserving of consideration. And what also separates Munson is his postseason play. Munson's .357 postseason average is the third best amongst the over 260 players with at least 130 postseason plate appearances, winning 2 World Series, with his 9 singles and his only loss in the '76 World Series being a record at the time, and that was in just 4 games. What could help Munson the most is the induction of Buster Posey, who appears to be a possible first-ballot Hall of Famer. The two have numbers close to each other, with Munson playing more games and both leading their teams to multiple titles. And if Munson eventually gets in, then it could open the door for Johan Santana, a player from the same era with a few more years, World Series titles, a World Series MVP, and a career OPS+, only behind Mike Piazza and Josh Gibson for Hall of Fame catchers. His case hinging on Thurman Munson. And with the positions ready, that just leaves the pitchers. There are many starters to choose from, with Roger Clemens being the obvious one, rivaling Barry Bonds as the most deserving steroid user, while Curt Schilling then falls into the category with them, as off-field issues led to him telling the voters that he doesn't want to be in the Hall, which they listened to. And with many pitchers to choose from in Rick Reichel, Kevin Brown, Wes Ferrell, David Cohn, and Louis Tiant and Tommy John, who were on the committee vote but did not receive enough votes. But an interesting case to look at is Johan Santana. Another case of the voters valuing longevity over peak. If Santana wins the 2005 Cy Young, which he should have, the narrative changes completely. That would have been 3 straight Cy Youngs for Santana. The only pitchers with 3 Cy Youngs down the Hall of Fame are Roger Clemens, Clayton Kershaw, Max Scherzer, and Justin Verlander. Those last 3 being first ballot once they retired. Regardless of the awards, Santana was clearly a dominant pitcher of his time. From 2002 to 2010, Santana compiled an ERA+ of 150, the best in the time, with Roy Halladay behind him at 147. And Roy Oswalt third at 133, with his 50.5 WAR in the time only being bested by Halladay, with his 2.9 ERA besting Halladay by .14, with Halladay of course going on to be a first-ballot Hall of Famer, while Santana received just 2.6% of the vote. The biggest reason being, his career was cut short due to injury, pitching just 1 more season after 2010. For this reason, he's compared to Sandy Koufax, 2 pitchers who had incredible peaks, but careers were cut short due to injury, with Santana not even far behind Koufax in many categories. But if peaks become more valuable for Hall of Fame cases in the future, Santana definitely deserves a second look. And it leaves one more for a relief pitcher. This video was made before this year's announcement, and it looks as though Billy Wagner will make the Hall of Fame, which eliminates a clear answer here and opens the door for others. Relievers are always a topic of discussion, with only 8 making the Hall of Fame, with the best in Mariano Rivera being the only unanimous. But if Wagner gets in, the next closest is Joe Nathan, someone who also pitched less than 1,000 innings like Wagner. He was a bad starter in the beginning of his career, but he became an all-star as a closer. His time as a starter hurting his ERA, which is 0.5 points higher than Wagner, but he finished with a higher save percentage and more win probability added. A great peak for a closer that also saw a bad ending. He only appeared on 1 ballot and received less than 5%, while Wagner started at 10% and worked up from there. But what really made Wagner so impressive was his strikeouts. A career 11.9 K per 9, he was really the first 1-inning power closer, leading to the likes of Kimbrel and Jansen, who will get more consideration if Wagner gets in, with Wagner and Nathan's bad postseason hurting them, while helping others in consideration, like Francisco Rodriguez and Dan Quisenberry. Aside from Wagner at this point, it's hard to make a great case for relievers in comparison to starting pitchers and position players. But Wagner's induction will definitely shake things up, with more consideration for someone like Joe Nathan. So there's a team of snubs, some more deserving than others at different positions, but overlooked for various reasons. And we'll see snubs in future ballots, along with voters asserting their dominance by not voting for obvious Hall of Famers. Hopefully you liked this video, and if so, please consider liking and subscribing for new videos every week. Thank you.